Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Azure Talks. And thank you so much for joining today. Today, I'm in the podcast with an exciting guest. At least I find it very exciting guest, which will tell us about all the wonderful things and also the horrifying challenges in the space and the world of cloud security. He's a senior cloud security advocate at Microsoft. I believe he's a former Microsoft MVP for quite some years, author of some books and from the Must Learn KQL series, cybersecurity expert Rod Trent. Welcome, Rod.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. It's a joy to be here, to tell you the truth. I love talking about the things I love to talk about. And when you had kind of approached me about being on this podcast, I was extremely excited. Um, and hopefully I can bring some, like you said, bring some excitement to the discussion today around security, cloud security, maybe some cybersecurity, and I think maybe we'll talk a little bit about artificial intelligence. I think so.
Oh, that would be awesome. And I guess that security has been hot stuff for
Mm.
the last recent years, right? So there are a lot of topics that we could cover because security is everywhere within your IT landscape or your application landscape. Um, and well, I'm very happy to have you here on the show today and eager to learn from your wisdom and your experience you will share with us today. And without further ado, let's dive right in. And I would suggest to start at the beginning because for me, the very beginning is security strategy.
Mm.
What are your thoughts on that?
Well, and kind of, if we kind of funnel and talk a little bit, kind of like this cloud security strategy. I think if we want to focus there, I think one of the things that I generally like to highlight, whether it's on a podcast or webinar or in person. I'll be at the Midwest Management Summit at the end of the month, in person there. What I really like to do and kind of cover is talk to those individuals that are either in the midst of migration or considering migration, or just doing kind of a hybrid model of migrating workloads to the cloud. My primary focus at Microsoft, it's kind of changed over the past few weeks, but we'll talk about that later. But my primary focus at Microsoft has been the cloud side of security, because at Microsoft we've identified, working with customers, that this is kind of one of those areas where there's some gray areas and there's some potential for education around how to kind of modernize the approach and the strategy for security. I think I've heard even recently. You talked earlier about community. I always like to stay engaged and figure out what our customers are doing, what our partners are doing, where there might be some gaps that in knowledge that we can supply and things like this. I've heard even recently a couple situations where some customers, and I don't know how factual this is or not, because it's kind of in the public realm, but some customers have migrated to the cloud and then they're wanting to migrate back because it wasn't a good experience. I think a lot of times customers, to have that good experience, need to realize that the cloud is different than
Mm.
on premises, right? Even from a security approach, we approach things much differently when we can look at a box and control who has access to that versus that virtual machine or something being in the cloud. There is the potential for better security, but again, it's kind of a mind shift, a little bit of mentality and approach change that has to happen in respect to running workloads either on premises or on the cloud, or kind of a mixture of both. So it's not like running things on premises. You kind of have to modernize your thinking just a little bit to understand that it's different. And you
Mhm.
need to understand what those discrepancies and what those differences are. And that's when you start to have that success. Um, and I would almost guarantee you that those customers that I heard potentially that trying to migrate some workloads back, they literally went in as part of one of their project lists and said, okay, we're migrating everything. Or maybe their CEO or some, C-level exec said, hey, I talked to these people, we got to migrate everything. It's going to save us so much money. Um, the customers that do that, that project is just going to drag them down, right?
I hear
It
it a
needs to
lot.
be kind
Yeah.
of a needs to be kind of a workload by workload migration, and not everything needs to be migrated to the cloud. Just to be honest with you, right? Some things work better on premises, but again, there's that whole mentality and mind shift. And I think a lot of it is more or less around kind of this zero trust approach or zero trust mentality, where a lot of times from a security perspective, customers have kind of tried to build these kind of like the old moat around the
Mhm.
organization. We're trying to protect people from getting in. So we're building this protection around with our firewalls and things like this. You're never going to keep people out. As long as you have end users in your organization that do silly things, click on silly things, you're never going to keep intruders out. What you want to do is start right at the beginning, that device, that user. You need to identify and verify that identity, that device, and things like this on the onset instead of trying to build a moat around it once you have it deployed. You
Mhm.
need to deploy these things from this zero trust model so that you can trust, well, not really trust them, but at least trust that deployment of what that thing is, so that then you can monitor and manage the security for that device after, right? So you're a little bit more um, more secure about how that is deployed. And in doing so, we at Microsoft, we've created some very significant, very important, I believe, tools that are critical to this process. Things like Defender for Cloud, our Defender, endpoint, Defender for Identity, all of our Defender branded. Microsoft likes to put, rebrand every 6 months, and I promise you, we will rebrand here shortly again on some things. But um, all of our Defender products. You talked a little bit earlier about security being kind of this hot area. I think I've not worked for Microsoft forever. I was a customer. I was an MVP, like you had mentioned. But I have seen Microsoft over the past 5 or 6 years get really serious and understand that the only way that customers are going to be successful in the cloud is that there needs to be a focus on this security first,
Mm.
right? Deploy these workloads securely. So we have invested heavily. We have gone from um, the laughing stock of patching, I would say, through the
Yeah.
2000s, right? To an actual security company within a very short period of time, because that's where we put our focus. We wanted to ensure that our customers, no matter they were using our products or they were connecting other products or other clouds or other hybrid situations to Azure, that they should be able to secure their entire environment. Um, so these tools are important for that approach and for that model and for those workload migrations to the cloud. Defender for Cloud. As much as I have worked with Microsoft Sentinel for the past 4 years, like literally every day, and I absolutely love that tool, and I'll preach it, to the mountains. Sentinel's awesome. Defender for Cloud is more important for those workload migrations than Microsoft Sentinel is. Yes, Sentinel has some key features and some key value that's going to help you continue and monitor security for your environment. But as you migrate those workloads, when you turn on Defender for Cloud for those workloads, it's going to enable you to deploy those securely from this modern perspective that we're talking about, not the old on-prem legacy kind of model or approach, but from a more modern cloud-based Defender um, approach. Defender for Cloud, migrate that workload. It's going to give you recommendations. So if you deploy that and there's a port left open because you used to leave that thing open on premises, it's going to tell you that this port is left open and here's the reason why you shouldn't do that. Would you like me to close that for you? Or would you like me to fix that for you? Obviously, customers have the opportunity to adjust that as they go along, but it's going to help them secure it. But at the same time, which I think is wonderful, I think sometimes a lot of customers and even us Microsoft folks overlook this. It's a teaching tool.
Mm.
Talk about that modernization and that change in approach and that mindset. Defender for Cloud can help change that approach, and eventually customers are like, oh my goodness, there's a lot of this stuff that we didn't even do on premises. So they will take what they have learned through Defender for Cloud and kind of take that same approach and that same model on premises. So it's a holistic teaching tool as well. I think people tend to overlook.
It's awesome because what you're actually mentioning is, um, I tried to quote it from the Microsoft documentation from Learn, but there's something in the cloud adoption framework around the paradigm shift, right? So from
Yeah.
traditional to more modern, cloud-based, maybe even cloud native approaches and modernization of your landscape. And what you're actually telling me is that there are customers that, by the belief that they will reduce cost or increase their security posture or better handle compliancy and regulation, they will adopt the cloud. They will migrate their workloads to cloud, and they fail heavily in doing so.
Yeah.
And it's kind of funny that you mentioned that Defender for Cloud actually is leveraging that cloud adoption mindset, because, as you mentioned, you can just, on a click of a button, implement a recommendation given to you by Microsoft. However, it's not just fire and forget, because if your next workload has the same port, let's say 3389 for your RDP workloads, for your remote desktop environment, if you have that open, it will just pop on again. So it's like a in-your-face tool, I would say.
It can be if you enable it to be that way, and I would recommend that you do that.
So cloud adoption may be one of the key success factors for your security approach in the cloud as well. But let's say that we have an organization that has the technical skills and has the business case around it, and knows how the financials work in cloud, because that's a very important one, right? So we talked about this with Leo Kamrat in the last episode, and the episode before with Steve Buchanan, both colleagues of yours. And I keep mentioning it, and I will do so again in this podcast, in this episode. Lifting and shifting without optimization will make your costs grow in the cloud.
Absolutely.
If you are not going to leverage the power of the cloud, don't expect it to be more cost efficient. It can be, but you have to do something for it.
Yeah.
And I guess the same goes for security, right? So we have all these bells and buttons within we're at AzureTalks, so we're talking Azure products and services. We have all these bells and buttons, products, services, tools within Azure to increase your security posture. That doesn't mean that we have to build 500 Azure firewalls or third-party NVAs to strengthen your security posture. So there comes some strategy or some design work within. Maybe you can explain a little on how Microsoft Sentinel and Microsoft Defender for Cloud work together to improve your security in the cloud.
Right. Well, and I appreciate that. That's one of the things I think is kind of like that value add that customers kind of need to understand. Again, I come from primarily the Sentinel side of the house here in cybersecurity. I've worked with that tool every single day. Just to kind of explain what these things do and kind of a better way of understanding these. So we have all these Defender products, right? We have Defender for Cloud, we have Defender for Endpoint, we have all the 365 Defender stuff. Each one of those do a very good job at what it's intended to do, right? So you have the identity stuff, Defender for Endpoint, obviously the devices, things like that. They're very good at what they do. Defender for Cloud handles those cloud workloads, right? We have different workloads that are built in. It also does things on-prem, right? Defender for Cloud. It also does things in AWS, right? And does things in Google Cloud and any other cloud that we need to connect. As I was talking a little bit earlier, in a perfect world, all customers, the only thing that they would use are Microsoft products. But that's not the case. And we really don't expect that. And we know that as Microsoft that works with, great, huge number of customers. They may be utilizing some application that's critical to their business that was designed and developed to run in AWS. We believe that we should still, at Microsoft, help those customers secure that AWS workload, right? So while Defender for Cloud is kind of focused on, connecting AWS, we are using Microsoft tooling to be able to capture that information. Microsoft Sentinel, on the other hand, best way to kind of describe this and I described it many times like this, but I think it's probably kind of the best storyline. Um, One of my favorite TV shows comes on every Tuesday night here in the United States called The Curse of Oak Island. I don't know how many people are familiar with this. These two brothers, they are based in Michigan in the United States. They bought this island in Nova Scotia um, under the pretense that there is this legend that the Knights Templar, it sounds fantastical, but the Knights Templar actually buried treasure on this island up in Nova Scotia. Um, Love the show. My wife hates it. She leaves the room every time it comes on. That's all right. I try to get her to watch it with me and get her interested, but that's okay. But I love the show. I'm addicted. I'm hooked. It's into its 10th season. So as you can imagine, they find things periodically. They haven't found the big treasure or whatever yet, but they're getting there. But what they do is they identify somewhere that they need to dig, and they bring in these huge, massive pieces of equipment like backhoes and things like that, and they dig out the earth, and they sift through it. They metal detect that earth that they dig up, looking for that thing, looking for something, some evidence that they're on the right track. But at the end of the day, it's not those huge, massive pieces of equipment that do an extremely great job in digging up earth that actually identify those things. It's what we call the sluice box. If you're familiar with what a sluice box is,
Mhm.
sluice box runs water through it along with the dirt, and the small things kind of get shifted. The big things get pushed out. The small things filter and end up in this little screen, and you find evidence of things, right? Some storyline or evidence of that you're on the right track. And that's kind of what Sentinel does for us. So we have these really awesome, massive, awesome products, all of our Defender stuff, Defender for Cloud, Endpoint, Identity. We connect all of that to Microsoft Sentinel so that the things that it misses, Sentinel, like that sluice box, is going to pull up those little nuggets of security that we are looking for that we don't want to miss. But
Mhm.
also in doing so, I can connect anything in my environment to Microsoft Sentinel. Anything that has a signal, anything that a signal is developed from a log file, you can connect it to Microsoft Sentinel so that the entire environment is captured, right? So my Cisco devices, my Palo Alto devices, anything on-prem, anything in any other cloud, any other service, ServiceNow, whatever that service happens to be, we can connect those logs to Microsoft Sentinel so that we can see an actual holistic view of security for the environment instead of just what Defender for Identity covers or what Defender for Cloud is covering. We can now tie everything together. So, for example, email comes into a user's inbox. Again, those silly users doing silly things. Email looks, if I looked at it as a security person, I would tell anyone, don't click on that.
Mhm.
You shouldn't do that. But for whatever reason, user clicks on it, um, and they're pushed out through a port in our firewall, and they're sent to a website. And that website is probably not a website I would go to, but the user's like, it looks nice. Something downloads in the background that the user never sees. It installs on the system. It sits, and the way threat actors work these days, it will install and it will kind of check some ports, maybe check some other identities and other profiles on the system. And if there's nothing really evident, it will sit idle. And most of them sit idle for like 2 or 3 months, waiting for the right opportunity, right, to do something nefarious. Now, we don't want to wait 2 or 3 months as security folks. I don't want 2 or 3 months down the road to understand that my entire environment is now infiltrated because of that one click.
Mhm.
What Sentinel does is it looks at that email address, it looks at that click, it looks at that port, it identifies that thing, that process was downloaded and installed, and it's going to capture all that stuff for me because I have my entire environment connected, and it's going to do it right now instead of 2 to 3 months later. I can go ahead and isolate that system, isolate that user account, and take care of that before it becomes a much larger problem.
Would it be a problem if, let's say, we're talking about cyber criminality right now, right? So it's just cybercrime.
Yep.
Someone that wants to do bad to your environment or to your business sits there for 2, 3 months. What would happen if they would strike immediately?
Well, if they would strike immediately, obviously, if you have the right tools in place, I think that's another one of the unfortunate things. The number of customers I've worked with that don't use things like Sentinel, don't use this kind of seamless integration of the environment. They'll use 5 or 6 different tools doing all these different things,
Mhm.
and because they're not tied together and show the entire storyline of the event, um, they're not going to capture that event until 3 or 4 days later, right? So an hour for some event like that, when it takes hold right away, that, you know, finding out even an hour later is sometimes um, too difficult and too much, because it's really easy for these things, if they find the right ports and the right user accounts to take advantage of, it's really easy for them to take hold like right away. So something like Microsoft Sentinel, and with all the things connected to it, we're going to find that right away.
Yeah, and we shouldn't forget we're talking about prevention and detection and response right now. So, and we shouldn't forget that um, it isn't so long ago that we, well, let's say in the endpoint detection and response systems, that we had the definition updates for your antivirus,
Yeah.
and those were just to, well, let's say, bridge the gap between today and 1 month ago. So it sounds scary about, well, that actually the vulnerability is in there for 1 or 2 months or 3 months before it strikes. Um, but thinking back on let's say 5 6 years back, where you had your antivirus, we were, as service providers or as partners for our customers, we weren't updating those definitions every day.
Right.
So looking at more on your detection and response for your security posture makes more sense than just updating your walls, let's say.
Yeah, well, that's a good point too. I would, I don't know how often you check, but if you run Windows, we even have it for Linux and Mac and Android and iOS and stuff like that. But we have the Defender for product that's updated. You don't
Mhm.
see it, but that is updated literally 3 or 4 times a day.
Mm.
Um, where you were talking about, yeah, in the old days, IT pros would absolutely, for whatever reason, and it was probably good, I would say, because at Microsoft, that when I talked about that whole patching situation, customers would wait 30 days or longer to patch because they didn't know if something would break or but we've become very good at identifying that stuff. The Even from the Windows AV side, the Defender stuff that we have for the devices that's updated daily, those are updated for a reason. People don't
Mm.
realize 4 or 5 times a day sometimes. You don't see it, it's just updated, doesn't notify you. In the old days, the IT pros would wait to deploy those. I can remember, I don't know, what was it, 2009, 2010. I was sitting at the Microsoft Management Summit. McAfee had sent out a signature update to every customer on the planet, and it broke every workstation and every server on the planet. And all of those people that were in attendance, I think we had 5, 6,000 people that year, that used McAfee. Nobody was in sessions. They are all trying to fix all their environments, right? But I think we've become very good at rolling out just the necessity and just the types of signatures that need to flow out. One of the things I think is really important, I mentioned, it's going to be updated 4 or 5 times a day automatically. Um, a lot of what we do at Microsoft, and we've talked about this even more recently, we have a specific product on this, Defender for Threat Intelligence, right?
Mhm.
At Microsoft, when customers use our products, things like Office, and things like that, as I mentioned earlier, everything that you use, identities, users, devices, whatever, if there's a log file, there is security importance in that log file that's going to develop a signal. As customers use our products and those signals are developed, they're fed back at Microsoft. We actually take those signals, we identify whether they're true value or not, and then they're actually fed back into the system. So that stuff that gets updated 4 or 5 times a day in the Windows Defender, there's a reason for that, because in those trillions of signals that we collect every day, we found at least something that needed to be updated and kind of, like you said, bridge that gap. So we're updating systems as we go along. But there's a lot of value in that threat intelligence. We are at Microsoft I think probably the largest entity on the planet that collects the most threat intelligence from the systems that our customers use.
And that's actually, I find it very exciting because, as you mentioned at the start of our conversation, that when people told me 10 years ago that Microsoft would be one of the biggest security companies in the world, I would probably look at my agenda and see if it was the 1st of April, right? I would assume it would be an April Fool's joke.
Yeah.
But fast forward 10 years, Microsoft has done a very great job by acquisition, by developing, by optimizing, but has done a very great job by building this total portfolio of point solutions and the integration between them. So we have a full portfolio of security products and services that, as you mentioned, even manage other premises, whether it be another cloud, on premises, and at the edge. So very exciting about the way forward Microsoft is doing right now. We did touch it a little bit on people starting with cloud and cloud strategy and security strategy. But I figure that there might be some people that are listening right now and think, I should really dive into that Microsoft Sentinel stuff, or that Defender for Cloud, or Defender for Endpoint, or the Defender suite. How should they get started with those products?
So that's another great question. In addition to becoming a security company and working really hard at that and developing some really good products and really good approaches to security, recommendations and things like that, right along the way and in line with everything, we have created some really awesome learning tools. So if you go to learn.microsoft.com, there are learning paths for each of these products. Learning paths on their own, but also learning paths that kind of funnel each individual that wants to learn about Sentinel or wants to learn about Defender products or Defender for Cloud or what have you, into what we call the SC series of exams. There's all the way from SC 100 now, I think, to SC. Is there a 500? I'm not sure. At least SC 400. I don't know if the 500 is there yet or not, but
there's 900 though.
Oh, so it skips 400 to 900, right?
Yeah,
that's right. Yeah. Okay. Sorry, I get that wrong sometimes. But the SE series of exams, security exams, right, are kind of an important thing. They're going to give you all the knowledge that you need, and you utilize that along with some of the hands-on. Because if you think about Defender for Cloud and Microsoft Sentinel, all you need is an Azure account, and you get 30 days free trial for these products to go in and just get some hands-on with it and figure these things out, and just go in and, like I do, go in and start messing with it and fall in love with them, right?
Mhm.
And figure out how that they would fit within your environment. But again, I think that's the best way, the best approach is to take a look at that. Obviously, there's some hard work that's being done across all of our product groups that develop things like we have Ninja series training, right? If you go to, I think, aka.ms/Ninja training, I think it is. It's going to give you the list of all of our Ninja trainings. And what that is just kind of some aggregated links provided from each of those product teams of the things that they think and they believe that's necessary for you to know to be able to utilize the product. Again, if you come back to the Learn modules, it's going to have some wealth of a dividend where you're going to be able to sit for that exam, right? And so that's kind of important. Those SE series exams have really become kind of the primary and kind of mainstay for those organizations that want their folks to utilize Microsoft Security Stack across their environment.
Awesome. And well, the learning continues because, as we mentioned earlier, there are some exciting stuff being integrated with artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
And obviously, I would invite you to talk a little about the things that you're working on right now, and maybe even dwell a little bit on the concepts of why you are developing some sort of services or integrating them. And just, I'm also very interested in how Microsoft is managing more of the horrifying part of those services because it can get scary really quick, right?
Yeah. Well, it can. I think there's really kind of misnomer and a kind of misconception right now around this generative AI. I am the AI lead on my team from a security perspective. Early on, when Microsoft started talking about this, like what January, I think is probably some of the first evidence of that. Um, I am a security person through and through. My first questions are always, is it secure?
Mhm.
Right? Is that API secure? What's that API stream look like? The unfortunate thing at the time, I was the only one asking those questions, which is now the reason why I'm the AI lead on my team. Um, but what I've discovered working in depth with the artificial intelligence, the chat GPT stuff and DALI, and what I've identified is that while a lot of people and customers are enamored with that chat GPT, that public version of the OpenAI system, um, we do some things at Microsoft, which I'm actually starting to become extremely proud of and start to talk about. We put Azure and the power of Azure and Azure security, RBAC and some of those identities and things, and how putting kind of the Azure guardrails, or if you will, around that Chat GPT and those instances and that generative AI and things like that. So I kind of hesitate a lot, right, to say, yeah, go check out Chat GPT. Yeah, pay for the premium version because you get that extra stuff in the API and everything, and you can develop your own apps. I tell people just kind of hesitate and just slow down for just a second. Yes, there's some absolute value there, which we found, right? In particularly even from a security perspective and being able to provide additional value to what we're doing for analysts and cyber security and things like that. However, I would wait for the Azure OpenAI cognitive service version of the Chat GPT because that's what I've been working with. I started personally with the Chat GPT public stuff and then migrated over to the Azure OpenAI stuff about a month ago. And I can't tell you, just it's kind of like a whew moment, right?
Mhm.
Because I think we're doing and we're taking the right approach at Microsoft and trying to develop responsible AI, right? Ensuring that the security is in place, ensuring that there are ways to monitor privacy, monitor leaks, monitor those things that everyone seems to be afraid of. Elon, I think every day says, "Hey, we got to stop this," but
Yeah,
instead
he
he creates
does.
his own. But instead he creates his own company last week for AI. So who knows? But there are some detriments to it, absolutely. But as long as you get the right guardrails in place and you approach it with the right mentality about what it is, this generative AI is all based on the data that is fed into it, right? So
Mhm.
um, I spent a lot of time over the past several weeks, couple months, um, learning to kind of build and develop my own models that I'm training my own AI with. In fact, I'm working now to try to hopefully here release publicly and then also open source it, put it on a GitHub repository somewhere, specific to things like KQL, the query language that we utilize in Sentinel and Defender and things like this, where customers would be able to go in, create their own instance where if they're migrating from something like, let's say, Splunk or
Mhm.
QRadar or Logarithm, and they want to retain some of their old detections, their old values, all they have to do is stick it into this tool and it's automatically going to create those detections for you. You can do that with a public GPT today, but you have to go back and it's not perfect. And you have to know KQL to go in and take a look at it and say, oh, didn't quite get it right. Now I've got to fix it myself because it's not perfect. It's based on what is being fed into that model or that engine. So the things that I'm doing, at least with in respect to the thing I'm working on, is it knows about KQL. It knows about those other detections, so that it's going to be more accurate the first time.
And what you're actually saying is that um, that I might be a little bit biased because um, Azure OpenAI cognitive services, but it's more of a governance solution
Yeah.
compared to more of the uh, OpenAI solutions we already know on.
It's
Okay.
Wild West versus an established Western city. Let's put it that
Yeah,
way.
yeah.
Yeah.
So when talking about security operations, me as a SOC, as a security operation center analyst or engineer, what benefits can I expect in the near future from those products and services that Microsoft is working on right now?
Yep. So about 2 weeks ago, we held our first annual. Was it 2 weeks or 3 weeks? I forget now. But we had our first ever Microsoft Secure, which is our first party secure event. We were
Mhm.
feeling really good about the security industry at this point, as being a security company that we have our own event now. We during the event showed some demos and things of what we call Security Copilot. And just as you've seen us put the word Defender literally on everything in our security platform, you're going to see the word Copilot
Yeah.
stuck on everything that we have in every other product, it seems like. Because what do we have now? We have Office Copilot, which is not quite yet available. It's in private preview, I think. What else do we have? GitHub Copilot, which is amazing, by the way. I use that like every day. Which I'm not a developer, but that GitHub Copilot makes me a developer. I'm like, man, this is cool.
It even gives recommendations when writing blog posts.
Yeah,
It's absolutely fantastic. True.
yeah. We have the Bing Copilot now, where if you use Edge, you can ask it questions and even create images. Anyway, so we have the Security Copilot, so we're kind of taking that same similar model again, feeding it something very specific. In this case, the things about security, that threat intelligence we talked about, and things like that. So yeah, we did show some demos. That is currently in development at Microsoft, and it's going to be absolutely awesome. And I go back, so it's going to provide a lot of value, right? Particularly for analysts and security folks. I see it, and it's gonna be a lot to it. There's gonna be a lot of cool value, but again, I always like to harken back to that education piece.
Mhm.
So you're working in Microsoft Sentinel or Defender, maybe for some advanced hunting. You want to look for something specific. You say, hey, create a query for this. It's going to automatically create that query for you without you having to have, additional knowledge around that. But an incident gets created in Microsoft Sentinel. You've determined it's absolutely needs to be investigated. You can ask that security copilot questions about that, or it's going to know based on that specific incident what the criteria is that it needs to search on, and it's going to produce and develop and offer you suggestions of how to react to that. Again, that's awesome from a security perspective. It's going to help customers learn how to use Microsoft Sentinel better and learn KQL, but it's also, again, an education tool. This modern kind of scene, this modern kind of security tool, how this modern era, how you're going to approach security from that perspective. It's going to know and help educate your analyst on how to do that. So the next time you may not have to ask that security copilot, you just do it. Or based on what that recommendation is from that security copilot, you may create some automation around that, so it just automatically manages that for you next time.
Yeah. So put it in a playbook and well, then it would be some sort of fire and forget. But I do want to emphasize that we mentioned cloud adoption earlier, and in my field, I see the same with things like Kubernetes and containerizing stuff.
Yep.
That all these managed services make things easier for you, but for us as IT pros or as subject matter experts, you do have to know what goes down under the hood.
Yep.
So, for instance, if artificial intelligence is helping you out create your KQL query, um, you do have to understand what the query is doing and what data it is giving back and what it's not. And we are very lucky that someone helped us improve threat hunting and incident response capabilities with something called MustLearnKQL. And
Ah,
obviously that is you, because you created the MustLearnKQL series. And I wanted to ask, what inspired you to create that series?
well, that's actually an interesting story. The inspiration was actually a lack of inspiration. No, I sat it's been about 2 years now, potentially. Yeah, it's getting close, but, I sat in a product team meeting a couple years ago, and it was brought up during that meeting based on customer feedback that customers were not utilizing Microsoft Sentinel or Defender for Cloud or Defender stuff to the extent that they should because they were afraid of this brand new query language, which is not really brand new or wasn't at the time. But I think to a lot of customers, just starting to take advantage of the cloud, it was brand new. And it just
Mm,
seemed like a brand new thing. KQL, Kusto Query Language, is a query language that was developed to take advantage of cloud clustering and resources, right? So you have things like SQL query language, SQL Server. You have there's another Kusto. There's a few other query language. Every scene has their own query language, and I kind of found out early on working with our customers with Microsoft Sentinel that the query languages they were using were just, oh my goodness, burdensome and problematic. I worked with a customer in Oklahoma at one point. I was there to deliver a week-long workshop on Microsoft Sentinel. They were migrating from QRadar or wanting to migrate from QRadar. And that was the biggest evidence to me of how powerful and simple this KQL query language is, right? Um, they would, as part of their municipality, law enforcement would come to them and ask for data that they had stored in their SIEM or their data stores that they were utilizing in their SIEM. Their SLA for law enforcement was 3 days. That meant they had to create the query, debug the query if they didn't write it correctly, um, query and utilize the CPU and data resources to pull that data in within 3 days. And that, to me, I thought that's just amazingly silly, right? That a query language or a tool like that would take 3 days to return. From a security perspective, if I don't have information like this, I'm in trouble,
yeah.
right? If it's going to take me 3 days to get that information, can you just imagine the state of that environment, right? That's just crazy. So we took their data, migrated it to Microsoft Sentinel, ran their query and against their data in Microsoft Sentinel and also in their tool. The results for Microsoft Sentinel came back with less than 15 seconds. And the reason behind that is KQL was built to take advantage of the cloud, right? Those
Mm,
CPU resources being elastic, being able to take advantage of clustering. The whole goal of this query language is to pull back results extremely quickly. And that's not just, I love it from a security perspective, but it's not just security, it's also performance. If your VM is running poorly, you're supplying some kind of service or application to thousands of people, or maybe it's even a public thing, and there's a performance issue, you need to know about it right away. Otherwise, your help inbox starts flooding because of customer complaints, right? So you need to be on top of that. That's another reason for this query language. It's very powerful, very simple. So sitting in that meeting with those product managers and hearing that, I was just like, "What the? Oh my goodness, that should never be." So I thought, I'm just going to start a blog series on KQL. I'm going to go through the very simple, very easy steps to kind of learn and all of the things that you would see as a security person, all those different KQL operators and functions and things like this. I didn't know how far it was going to be. I had no plans. It ended up being like 20 chapters or 20 blog posts. And then at the end, I decided, hey, I'm just going to slap a certificate on this. If you finish this, ask for a certificate. I'm going to give it to you. Oh my goodness, this thing took off. It
yeah.
was, one of those unintended things in your life. You're just like, hey, I'm just going to do this for myself. I know some customers are going to enjoy this, but as of today, we have a little over 3,000 people that have requested a certificate. Many, many more have gone through this thing and are still going through it. I wanted to kind of expand the audience beyond just because it's on a GitHub repository. Anyone who goes to ak.ms/ MustLearnKQL will find everything, all the way from the examples in the series to the series itself. But I wanted to expand beyond that because it seemed to be kind of important. So I created some Amazon versions of this as well. There's the Kindle version. There's actual physical copies. I mentioned I'll be at the Midwest Management Summit at the end of the month. I'll have 10 copies with me to give away as swag, signed copies, of course. Unless I don't like you. If you open it, it doesn't have my signature, then No, I'm just kidding. Then just ask me to sign it and I'll sign it. But there's Amazon copies and people, the thing about this is though, I make no money off this. My intent on this was to educate people on KQL because I believe it's absolutely necessary. If you're going to work within the cloud, we talked about those performance statistics for things like VMs and Kubernetes and your containers and stuff like that. And also from a security perspective, I believe it's absolutely critical. So anything that gets any money that gets purchased or as part of this series, all that money goes um, to St. Jude Children's Hospital, right? So to help children with whatever ailment or malady they have, security, cancer mostly, and things like that. So it's a way of also giving back. So
Beautiful. Yeah.
I apologize right up front that the Amazon tools to convert this book into an Amazon version, it's not that great. It doesn't provide page numbers, which I've heard. I hate books without page numbers. And sometimes the images are a little crappy in the printed copies, and I apologize for that, but that's not my fault. That's Amazon's. I've tried to, but think about that really small nominal fee. It's like $1.99 for the Kindle version. I think it's like $10 for the soft cover version. I kept it as minimal as possible, just so there would be enough money to go to St. Jude's when you purchase this thing. So you're actually kind of giving back when you do that,
Awesome.
requesting those. So.
Yeah, awesome. Beautiful, beautiful to give back to those kind of organizations.
Yep.
Rod, I found it a fantastic conversation. Unfortunately, we're at the end of the episode. I would like to thank you for your inspiration today, and it was an absolute pleasure to have you on the show today. Before we wrap this episode up, I can't figure people can't find you online, but just for the sake of being very, very concrete about these kind of things, where can people find you?
Yes, I'm a very public person because I have worked with communities. I would say probably all of my career, whether working for Microsoft or not. Very easy to find me. You can find me on Twitter, just at Rod Trent, all one word. LinkedIn, it's very easy to find me as well. And in fact, if you want to connect with me and ask me questions, I'm happy to answer those. Most likely, you'd want to do that on LinkedIn. Twitter is just a way to kind of participate and chat with people about certain topics and things like that, and less personal. But yeah, LinkedIn, Twitter. I'm also on Mastodon. When Elon acquired Twitter and everybody got up in arms and upset, I said, just hold on. Everything's going to get better. A lot of people went to Mastodon. So I went there myself too, just to see what it's like. Unfortunately, it has potential, but it just seems like that's where posts go to die. So if you want to go find me on there, I'm there as well. People ask, why do you still do it here? And I go where our customers are, right? Our customers, it's not up to me to tell you where to come find me. It's up to you to tell me where to come find you and participate wherever you happen to participate in that community, whether it's Reddit, Discord, wherever, you're going to find me there. So
awesome. Well, I believe no one will have trouble finding you, and if they do, I can always point them towards the right destination. Thank you again, Rod, and obviously to all the listeners. Thank you for joining us again today. Have a wonderful day, and hope you will be there the next time as well. Take care.
thanks, everyone.